I've been working on trucks for 22 years. Diesel, gas, fleet, farm, all of it. And I have never seen a company torch a product launch this badly and this quietly. Ford spent billions building the F-150 Lightning. They put it on magazine covers. They had the President of the United States drive one out of a factory on live television. They said it was going to change everything. 3 years later, the lots are full of unsold trucks. Workers are laid off. The losses are staggering, and Ford is barely talking about it. So today we are going to talk about it, because the people who bought this truck early deserve honesty, and the people thinking about any EV truck deserve the real story. This is how Ford quietly killed the F-150 Lightning. If this kind of real talk is useful to you, hit subscribe right now. I don't do hype here. I don't repeat press releases. I do the actual story with actual numbers. Let me take you back to May 2021. Ford unveiled the Lightning at their Dearborn plant. The crowd was enthusiastic. The starting price was announced at $41,000. That was the number they used to compare it directly to a base gas F-150. Ford CEO Jim Farley said reservations flooded in immediately. 200,000 people put down deposits. The narrative Ford was building was clear. The American truck buyer was ready for this moment. The electric revolution had arrived at the most iconic truck in the country. Except the buyers weren't ready, and Ford's own internal production numbers would prove it within 18 months. Here is where the production story gets important. Ford initially projected building 150,000 Lightning units per year at full ramp. That was the public number. That was what justified the $5.7 billion they committed to EV production expansion in North America. By 2023, Ford cut that annual target down to roughly 35,000 units. That is not a minor revision or a modest pullback. That is a 77% reduction from their stated plan. They didn't make a big announcement about the cut. There was no press conference, no prepared statement. The reduction showed up in production data filings and analyst earnings calls. If you weren't paying close attention to those, you completely missed it. That was the point. But it gets worse than the production cut alone. In early 2024, Ford halted Lightning production entirely at the Rouge Electric Vehicle Center for several weeks. The official explanation cited retooling and inventory management. The real reason was straightforward. Trucks were sitting on dealer lots and not moving. You don't pause a production line that is selling product. You pause it when dealers are calling you and asking when the incentives are going to get bigger. You pause it when you are spending money to build inventory that no one is buying. Ford's own plant sat quiet while the press releases kept talking about the electric future of the brand. Now let's talk about price, because this is where the early buyers got hurt in a way that is difficult to defend. In early 2023, Ford slashed the Lightning's price by $10,000 across most trim levels. The base model dropped from around $56,000 down to $46,000. Some configurations saw even larger reductions. Ford's official statement said this was about making the truck more accessible to more Americans. That framing might be partially true, but what it actually did was immediately destroy the resale value of every Lightning that had already been sold and was sitting in a customer's driveway. Think about that from the early buyer's perspective. You bought a Lightning in 2022. You paid a premium price. Some buyers paid over sticker because dealers were marking them up during the initial hype period. Then Ford cuts $10,000 off the price 12 months after you took delivery. You go to trade it in or sell it privately. The dealer pulls up current market pricing and tells you the truck is worth significantly less than what you still owe on it. Some early Lightning owners ended up underwater on a truck they had owned for under a year. That situation, paying more on a loan than the truck is worth, is financially painful and leaves buyers feeling betrayed. That is not how you build loyalty in a truck market. Truck buyers talk to each other constantly. Word got around fast through every dealer service bay and work site. The quality issues compounded everything that was already going wrong. The Lightning's early production run had documented problems that went well beyond what is considered acceptable for a typical new model launch. Owners reported suspension clunks that required multiple dealer visits to properly diagnose and address. The software system had bugs significant enough to cause the instrument cluster to go blank while the truck was being driven. The frunk, the storage compartment under the hood where the engine would normally be, had documented latch failures reported by enough owners that it became a recurring topic in Lightning owner forums and Facebook groups. Ford issued software updates over the air and sent technical service bulletins to dealers. Some problems got resolved, some improved only partially. But the critical issue here is the timing. When a new truck has quality problems in its first year of production, and it's also a new technology category that many buyers were already cautious about, the combination is toxic for sales momentum. It gives skeptics exactly the ammunition they need. It gives fence sitters a reason to wait. I want to be specific about the financial losses because this is where you understand why Ford has been systematically pulling back. Ford created a separate division called Ford Model E, specifically to track their electric vehicle business. They did this partly for transparency and partly because investors and analysts demanded it. What those numbers showed was brutal and consistent. In 2023 alone, Ford Model E lost $4.5 billion as a division. For the Lightning specifically, internal reports and independent analyst estimates put the per-vehicle loss at over $36,000 for each truck that rolled off the lot and was sold to a customer. Ford's own chief financial officer acknowledged that per-unit losses were significant when pressed by analysts on quarterly earnings calls. Losing $36,000 on a truck that retails for around $55,000 is not a path to survival. That math does not work at any volume, and it especially doesn't work when your volume is shrinking. Some people make the argument that those losses are normal for a startup entering a new technology space. There is some truth to that argument. Battery costs, new tooling investment, new supply chains, new manufacturing processes, it all costs substantial money up front. But Ford is not a startup. Ford is a 120-year-old corporation with shareholders who expect a credible path to profitability. When you are losing $36,000 per unit and your production volume is simultaneously declining, you are moving in exactly the wrong direction on unit economics. You need significantly more volume to spread fixed costs and bring per-unit losses down. Ford was getting less volume every quarter. Every quarter that trend continued made the financial case harder to defend in the boardroom. The dealer inventory situation became visible to anyone who was paying attention. By late 2023 and running into 2024, Lightning inventory on dealer lots climbed past 60 days of supply in many markets. 60 days is the threshold where the industry considers a vehicle slow-moving. Lightnings were sitting at 90 days, 100 days, and longer in some regions. Dealers were offering substantial cash incentives on top of factory rebates. In some markets, you could find Lightnings with $15,000 in combined incentives being stacked to move them off the lot. When a truck that launched with dealer markups above sticker is now available with $15,000 discounted off the price, the market is sending a clear and loud message. The market was saying it did not want this truck at the original price point in the quantities Ford had planned to produce. Let me explain specifically why the traditional F-150 buyer said no to the Lightning. I am not speaking for every buyer, but I talk to truck owners every single week in my shop and out in the field. The concerns were consistent and practical. They were not ideological objections to electric vehicles. They were real-world operational problems. Towing range was the first and loudest concern. When you tow a fully loaded trailer with a Lightning, the range can drop from the EPA-rated 300 miles to under 100 miles. That is not speculation or opinion. That is documented in rigorous third-party testing conducted by outlets including Motor Trend, TFL Truck, and others who put real loads behind the truck on real roads. For a farmer towing equipment between fields, for a contractor hauling materials between job sites 50 miles apart, for anyone doing genuine work truck tasks in an area where charging stations are sparse, 100 miles of towing range is not usable. It's a deal breaker. Charging infrastructure in rural areas is still limited enough that the gap between a gas station and the nearest reliable fast charger can be significant. The second concern was weight and its long-term implications for work use. The Lightning weighs over 6,000 pounds before you load anything into the bed. That weight comes largely from the battery pack. 6,000 pounds of truck affects how it performs on soft ground at a job site. It affects how it behaves on unpaved roads. It puts more stress on tires, brakes, and suspension components under repeated heavy use conditions. Nobody has the 20-year data on how battery-weighted truck frames hold up under sustained workloads yet. Traditional truck buyers who run their vehicles for 15 to 20 years before replacing them factored that uncertainty directly into their decision. Third concern was charging network reliability. Ford made a smart move by negotiating access to Tesla's supercharger network for Lightning owners. But that partnership came after the truck had already launched. Early Lightning owners were working with a patchwork of non-Tesla charging networks that had well-documented reliability issues. Charger failures, incompatible connectors, payment system problems, slow charge speeds. These were regular experiences for early EV owners trying to use third-party networks. When you are depending on a truck for your income and a charger fails, that is not an inconvenience. That is lost work and real money. Gas truck buyers take for granted that the infrastructure they depend on has been tested and refined over 100 years. EV charging at the reliability level that working truck buyers require is not there yet in enough locations. Fourth concern: long-term parts and battery replacement costs. This is the concern that gets the least media attention but matters most to the kind of buyer who keeps a truck for a decade or more. A Lightning battery pack replacement has been quoted at around $40,000 out of warranty. That is close to the purchase price of a base model truck. If the Lightning as an active product line continues to shrink or is eventually discontinued, what does parts availability look like in 12 years? What does software support look like when the servers that manage over-the-air updates are eventually shut down or redirected? These are not paranoid questions. They are exactly the kind of questions that experienced truck owners ask before making a major purchase. Ford does not have clear public answers for them. Ford built the Lightning for a customer profile that was partially real and partially constructed. The target profile was a current F-150 buyer who is also interested in technology and cares about fuel costs, lives in a suburban or urban environment, has access to a garage and a home charger, and uses the truck primarily for commuting, weekend projects, and occasional hauling. That buyer exists. Ford found 200,000 of them willing to put down a deposit. But that buyer is not the core of the F-150's commercial foundation. The core of the F-150's business is work trucks, fleet buyers, contractors who need the truck every day, farmers who operate far from the nearest charging infrastructure, rural owners who cannot justify towing range anxiety on a tool they depend on. These buyers were not the Lightning's designed for customer, but Ford needed their purchase volume to make the production and financial plan work. The marketing was built for the first profile. The pricing was positioned for the first profile. The range and charging infrastructure suited the first profile adequately. But the first profile is a smaller market segment than the second, and many buyers in the first profile already had alternative EV options competing for their attention. Tesla Model Y, Rivian R1T, the Hyundai Ioniq 5, among others. The Lightning competed in a crowded and price-sensitive segment for the buyer it was designed to attract, while simultaneously failing to convert the buyer whose volume it actually needed to make the business case work. Ford's labor costs added another significant layer to the financial pressure. The United Auto Workers strike in the fall of 2023 halted Ford production across multiple lines and lasted 6 weeks. It resulted in a labor contract that meaningfully increased hourly wages and benefits going forward. For a vehicle platform that was already losing over $36,000 per unit sold, higher structural labor costs narrowed the path to profitability significantly further. Some independent automotive analysts revised their projections for when Lightning could achieve break-even. Several of them moved to language like uncertain timeline or dependent on significant battery cost reductions. In financial planning terms, uncertain means the model doesn't pencil out under current assumptions. The comparison to Rivian is worth making briefly. Rivian is a startup that has also struggled with per-unit losses and production scaling challenges. But Rivian doesn't have 120 years of gasoline truck legacy infrastructure to maintain and protect simultaneously. They don't have a nationwide dealer network that also depends on F-150 gas and hybrid sales for their own profitability. They don't have a workforce that was building traditional internal combustion trucks for decades and now must retrain for an entirely different manufacturing process. Ford's EV pivot is constrained by obligations, existing relationships, and institutional momentum that a pure startup doesn't carry. Managing those constraints while also absorbing the cost of new propulsion technology from scratch is an extraordinarily complex challenge. Ford has been attempting it with increasingly mixed results. Now here is what all of this means specifically for people who already own a Lightning. This section matters most to me because if you made that purchase early, you are now watching the product line contract, and you are reasonably wondering what your truck's future looks like. The honest answer is that Ford will not abandon Lightning owners completely. They have warranty obligations that are legally enforceable. They have software support commitments. Their dealer service network exists and will continue operating. But the long-term part situation and software support timeline beyond the warranty period are genuinely uncertain in a way that is hard to fully assess right now. If you own a Lightning today, get everything addressed under warranty that you possibly can. Do not wait on known issues. Document every service visit and every software update installed. If problems recur, push Ford's customer care line persistently. Watch Ford's product announcements carefully. A confirmed second-generation Lightning with substantial improvements would actually be positive news for current owners because it signals continued investment in the platform and parts commonality. A pivot or extended delay would require a more cautious approach to planning for long-term ownership. The broader lesson from the Lightning story is not that electric trucks cannot work. The lesson is that you cannot design a product in a conference room based on consultant reports and expect the people who actually use that product every day for their livelihood to fall in line with the plan. Truck buyers are not trend followers. They are practical, skeptical, and loyal to what demonstrably works for their specific requirements. When something does not work for their use case, they do not post angry reviews and move on. They do not buy. And they tell their neighbor not to buy. And that word travels quietly through every job site and farm and fleet yard and dealer service waiting room. That is exactly what happened with the Lightning. Ford's executives heard from marketing consultants and sustainability advocates. They heard from technology journalists who were excited about the product. They heard from urban focus groups who said America was ready for an electric truck. Those voices were not entirely wrong. A segment of America was ready for exactly this product. But the segment of America that has bought F-150s for 40-plus years for work, the people who need a truck to function as a reliable tool, not a statement about their values, that segment said no clearly and consistently with their purchase decisions. And in the final analysis, that segment is what kept the F-150 the best-selling vehicle in the United States for over 4 consecutive decades. Ford will regroup. They may bring a revised Lightning back at some point with better battery technology, lower production costs, and improved range. They may lean further into their hybrid powertrain lineup, which is where the F-150 Power Boost Hybrid has already demonstrated real market traction. The hybrid F-150 sells steadily because it delivers fuel efficiency improvements without introducing range anxiety or charging infrastructure dependency. That middle path, a capable hybrid that saves fuel without requiring a complete infrastructure change, may be closer to what the actual truck market wants right now, rather than a full battery electric. The market has been telling Ford this story through every inventory report and every monthly sales figure. Whether Ford listens to it this time, rather than what their consultants say, is the question that will determine what the next chapter looks like. The Lightning experiment cost Ford billions of dollars over several years. It cost early buyers real money and depreciated trade-in values. It cost production workers at the Rouge plant their jobs when the line was cut back. It cost dealers who took delivery of inventory they could not move the carrying costs of trucks sitting on their lots. And it cost the concept of electric work trucks significant credibility with exactly the buyers who would need to adopt the technology for it to ever reach real scale in the commercial market. None of that damage is permanent or irreversible, but Ford is going to have to rebuild the trust the slow way, by building something that actually solves the real problems of the people who use trucks to make a living. That is the real story of the Lightning, not the version with the president behind the wheel, not the version with 200,000 deposit holders, the version built from production cut announcements, financial disclosure filings, owner forum complaint threads, and dealer inventory reports. Ford built a truck for a version of the truck buyer that was smaller and less loyal than they needed. The people who actually buy F-150s for work ran the numbers, thought about the range and the infrastructure and the resale and the battery replacement cost, and said not yet. The market spoke clearly. Ford is finally starting to listen. They should have asked sooner. If you want more coverage like this, documented numbers, real owner experience, no manufacturer's spin, subscribe to this channel. I'm not here to tell you EVs are universally wrong. I'm not here to tell you gasoline is the only answer for the next 50 years. I'm here to give you the honest picture of what is actually happening in the truck market, built on real data. That is what you came here for. See you on the next one.